likes football. So she said she did go in that.
Want me to bump you?
No, you can do it if you want to. It's okay. There you are. See how that might work. Look in there. I think unless I bumped it.
That looks pretty good. Yep. Yep. Looks pretty good. Yep.
Yeah, I can bring her up or
Zoom in.
He's in Hawaii, so we don't have to worry about it. Yeah, they're in Hawaii. Well, we're welcoming all of you tonight, and we're happy that you came. This is our last in this series of interviews that we're going to do. And for those of you who are new, we started these because we interviewed your Selectivo during the day one day, and everybody said, oh, I wish I had been here for that. So then we decided to move these to the evening so that people who couldn't come during the day would be able to come in the evening. And so we're happy tonight to have Mary Catherine Walter Morris as our interviewee. And I'm sure that she will have no trouble telling us about her life in Edwardsburg. As you know, she was born here, has lived here all her life, and holds that honor as being the only person so far that has done that. But before I let her start, I just want to, out of curiosity, ask you, how many of you were born at home? Born at home. How many of you were born at home?
I'm a depression baby, Janice. Depression baby.
You don't remember?
Neither were my siblings, but I.
You just think about that. You know that there will be,
Dad
the next
wasn't working.
generation will not have been born at home. They will have all been born in the hospital. And how all of us who were born at home have thrived and are still here. And maybe there's something to be said about being born at home, not being born in the hospital. But I was just curious because I was thinking about that the other day. You remember when it was a big fad to have your child at home or in a store window or whatever, and they had midwives and all that kind of stuff. There was all that controversy, and I thought, there's a whole generation of us who were born at home, and we survived.
With no fanfare.
Okay, so we'll let Mary Catherine start talking, and I think, do I need to ask you a question to get you started? I don't think so. Okay, would somebody get a glass of water so that Mary Catherine can get her horse? Go on, I'm getting my water. I'll tell everybody. This week I'll have my 89th birthday. And that's a lot of years. This is sad. I was just Well, I'll start. Well, this is going to be more or less in 3 sections. First, I'm going to give you some history of my family and a little bit of the life in Edwardsburg. And then I'm going to try to tell you things that I remember seeing. And then after that, you can ask me questions. The Rogers family, I'll tell you, the Rogers family lived on a farm in Milton Township, and were here all their lives. And also lived many houses in town. My grandfather, Rogers, had a store. One time he had a grocery store. And one time he was heading up to get electric plant in Edwardsburg so that the houses could have different lights rather than lamps. But, and my grandmother, as I go on to tell his story. Thank you. Speak up so those of us in the cheap seats can hear you. Joanne forgot the mic. Well, anyway, the Rogers family came from England in the 1300s. My great-grandfather Rogers settled in Adams Hill in 1854. This house that he settled, or his family lived in, is at the corner of Terrace Lane Road and US 12. It's still standing there. The farmhouse is still there, although it looks completely different than it did. But the family that came from England originally settled in Piqua, Ohio. And they lived among the Indians, and it was known that some of them married Indian girls. I don't recall if we ever were like Indians or looked like Indians, but that's the story. Now, George Rogers was my great-grandfather, and he was a first salesman in Cass County, selling for the Prudential Life Insurance Company. There were 2 boys born to this union, Manning and Charles. Manning took his own life when a young man, and Charles Rogers, my grandfather, married Mary Catherine Houseworth. And as I said, they lived at the corner of Terrace Lane Road and US 12. And the Houseworth family lived down the street of that street, Terrace Lane Road, and to the first street to the right, there was a farmhouse down there where the Houseworths lived. And of course, and they were married. And to this union were born Minnie, who was my mother, George, John, Ruth, and Mason. And my mother always stayed in Edwardsburg, but the rest of them moved away. Now, my father was a descendant of Jacob Walter, who was born in Snyder County, Pennsylvania, but came to Michigan in 1824 and settled on a farm on May Street. Jacob had a sister. He had Sister Priscilla, and well, there were 5 of them. But Priscilla lived on a farm, married a Newton Holsterman, and lived on a farm right at Garter Lake Road, which was at one time known as Mary's Tavern, and the house still stands today. It sort of don't look like the farm did. I thought one of the interesting things was they had a son named Emery. That was their only child, and they grew gypsum. And gypsum, I don't know. They just don't grow that around. We do out in Canada, but I guess up in northern Michigan. But I have quite a few old bills and things concerning the gypsum that they sold, and it was taken out of the Holsterman house, which is next to where Dick and Adelaide's grandson had just remodeled that home, and we remember it as the Ham's family. Willard Walter was my grandfather, and he was a person who I call him a speculator. He had many businesses, mostly general stores or grocery stores. Had one in Marcellus, one in Gasopolis, Mishawaka, and South Bend. Then in 1876, they opened their store in Edwardsburg. And he had several partners who were with him, and lots of times they didn't get along, so it was kind of have a partner, and then a partner would go someplace else, or my grandfather would go someplace else. But the store was still his building. And 1885, the other partners had left, and Willard was joined by his brother, Isaiah, and the business became known as W.M. Willard. This Isaiah was such a perfectionist, and the people said that when he would go at noon, he'd go home to lunch, and he'd walk down Elkhart Street across the highway down there, and he breaks
I'm sorry.
It's all right, that's all right. If I can get them.
their fathers, he just thought like to lunch and coming back. And Isaiah died in 1941. Now in the early 1900s, Minnie Rogers and Louis Walter were married and had one son, Roger, who died at the age of 3 months. Then I was born, then my sister Margaret, and my sister Frances, and Frances is with me tonight. Margaret lives in Wisconsin, Frances lives in Hines, and I've always remained living in Edwardsburg. The house I was born in 1915 was located on the corner of Elkhart Street and M62, where the Taco Bell still stands today. And there was a house just this side of it, a big house, but when they put the South Bend Road in, and I remember all these things, so I just am telling you, but anyway, that house was turned and put around down the road to the right there, and they put M62 in at that time, which was a gravel road.
What year was that?
That was, oh gosh, I don't really, well, I was just a little girl at that time. So I would say I was born in 1915, so it must have been in the 20s. I really don't know. It's probably the closest book that I remember. And I started school in what we call the old school building, which stood on the corner or on a vacant lot across from the Methodist Church and the Presbyterian Church. It was, as you had pictures of seen of it, it was a two-story wooden building. And the grade kids went to on the bottom floor, and the high school kids went up on the top floor. Now in 1935, I married Bob Morse and Miles. And in 1951, we purchased the store from my father. We had two daughters, Ruth Ellen and Martha, and Ruth Ellen is with me tonight. Ruth Ellen married Gary Evans of Wyandotte, and they had three sons. Joe, who was with the FBI in the DEA unit, John, who works as an auto parts paint specialist, and Jim, who is a realtor in Boyne City, Michigan. Ruth Ellen now lives in Boyne City, Michigan, too. And Marty married Gary Ketchum. He's a graduate of Edwardsburg High School, and they had three girls, Karen and Jody of Elkhart, and Kathy of Rockwell, Texas. And Marty and Gary have just recently moved from Elkhart to the villages near Ocala, Florida. And from my six grandchildren, I now have 14 great-grandchildren. So I said, well, I started with two, and then I had the two girls, and I had 6 grandchildren, and now I have 14, although they keep growing. But, so some of my memories of Edwardsburg are in 1921, 6 businesses on the Elkhart Street were destroyed in a huge fire. In those days, it took a group of men to pull a fire engine by its tongue, and the tank had to be filled at Pleasant Lake. And I can read one of the things that stands out in my memory is because my sister Margaret and I were just baby. I think I was about 6 years old. And anyway, got up in the morning and looked out the bedroom window, and the whole town was on fire. And we were petrified. We couldn't find my mother. She never was out of the house.
You were living in Elkhart Road at this time?
No, we lived on 12 on right down on, Main Street.
By the railroad tracks?
By the railroad tracks.
And what was burning?
The town, where the buildings burned over here on Elkhart Street.
And that was
That was in 1921. And I did have the names of the stores that burned, but I guess some reason I didn't get put in. In the spring of the year, one of the interesting things, of course, this was all gravel. There was just a dirt roads. But in the spring of the year, the Culver Military Academy would bring their horses. They're black. They call them the black horses of Culver Academy. And they'd come up through Edwardsburg. I think they came to Elkhart and then straight out and through Edwardsburg. And they would go on a camp out at Eagle Lake. And the Eagle Lake camp was about where it's Christiana Lake, not Eagle Lake, I'm sorry. But there was a big grove out there, and they had lots of everything. They had campgrounds and a baseball field, and lots of things happened out there. Now, plans in 1922 were drawn up to build a school, a new school. And this was, there was a lot of discussion that went on about that school. There were lots of hard feelings about that at the time. I was just little, but I do remember my folks and my grandfolks talking about this. And said many of them objected to the two-story. They felt it wasn't healthy. This is kind of way off from what it is today. Many of the objections to the two-story was that it wasn't healthy for young girls to be climbing so many steps every day. And now if they only knew what the guys do. The one-story building won out, and with the new school, Edwardsburg, one thing we did pay, we had the very best gym in the conference. It was a big gym, and everything had to be. Kids that lived in the town couldn't eat lunch at school. They had to walk home. So we walked from where the school is now, where it was, but just torn down, walked all through town and went clear down on the other side of Main Street. And that was lunch, and then you had to go back again. And schools closed quite a bit at that time because there was no way to plow the roads out like they do today. And lots of times the schools would be closed for 10 days to almost 2 weeks. And the teachers used to stay with my, well, he's a Westfall, and some of the others would stay with my folks because they couldn't go home. And during one of these bad storms, Mrs. Lindbergh, who was a mother, and I think you've all heard this story, she was the mother of Charles Lindbergh, was going from Detroit to Chicago, I guess, and her plane landed out on the north side of the field, was way out of a field out there. And that was quite exciting. So they brought her into the, stay all with the druggist. And she was put upstairs to stay until somebody could get her, rescue her. So anyway, as kids, we were always drawn, and we were always uptown, lots of kids. And we'd stand out in front of the drugstore yelling up at the window, "We want to see Mrs. Lindbergh." We all got to way better. So that was exciting. And one thing about, at that time, anything that happened in Edwardsburg, it either happened at the church or it happened in the school. There were dances held, but that was for the grown-ups. But just family affairs and things all took place in places like that. And then another thing was, Pleasant Lake was the main attraction for lots of people. And I said we lived in the lake in the summer, and we lived on the lake in the winter. That's just the way it was. Our fun took place either swimming or building bonfires or ice skating and all those things. Now this is kind of off a little bit, but the Presbyterian Church, and there's pictures of it. There's a man named Pierce Whitfield, and he was married to Mary Montgomery's aunt, and he was very active in the white cane movement for. He started. I hated to say that, but I knew he was very active for the movement for the white cane. A few people know that the people who are blind have the cane, and they carry to get them across the street. And the Presbyterian Church would have host a get together for them, and somewhere we have pictures of a whole group of people. Well, then we go on to about Depression days in Edwardsburg. And like the rest of the country, it was tough. And families had to move in with each other, and people from South Bend moved out here to the farms. And one of the things, the reason they came, because they made bathtub booze and sold it to the people in South Bend and in the cities. But they had to make a living. And I know these are things I heard, and of course I didn't attend any of them.
That's right.
And also they could have their own gardens and their own animals, and so they were able to survive. At that time, Social Security came in, and which was great. My father was supervisor of the township at the time, and he was so elated to think that, and I could hear him saying it, "Oh, it's so wonderful because the people, the old people can stay in their homes." They couldn't go to the poor farms because there was so few places. There wasn't any place for them to go. They had to move in with kids, and it got to be quite a problem. He was just very excited to think that the Social Security had gone in.
Just a little bit louder.
Okay, I know what you mean now. I'll try. My voice goes after I talk about so long. You wouldn't believe it, but it does. I have to read what it had. Oh, talking about the hard times and Depression days. There was a man in this town, he lived right over here on the corner where Mayhew's son-in-law was. And he was a crippled man. I don't know that, but anyway, he advertised. He had no job and he had no money, and he had some children, and he advertised in the paper to sell his children. That's how bad he was. I mean, and so the Masonic Lodge came to his rescue and helped him, so he did not have to do that. So that was everybody was really upset about that.
That was during the Depression.
Well, it didn't help at all to put his helicopter. It was my talk. One of the things that we came back, my husband, he was refereed a lot of basketball games, as you well know, and France's husband, Cecil. They started out together, and I thought it was kind of interesting because they went around Cass County, all around, and they got $5 a game. Imagine what the referees get today. In 1956, Bruce and Faye Sellers and Bob and I were appointed chairman of the first Miss Edwardsburg contest. Miss Edwardsburg in 1957 was Marianne Pantella. She went on to become Miss Blossom Time, and she got to go the bridge across the Straits of American Mountain had just opened up about that time, and all the queens were invited, and other people from all over Michigan were invited to walk across the bridge. Well, being the fact that I'm a little bit skeptical of heights, I wasn't too interested in going, so his mother got to go, which was great. And one of the things that was very hard, you'll be surprised at that time, I can remember going in and trying to get these kids to come. They didn't want to come. And talking to people about getting their children into this Miss Edwardsburg contest. And they didn't, half of them didn't even know where St. Joe was. But we went right into the classrooms and said, come on girls, you've got to join this contest. So they did. Well, it's still going, and it's been a big success. I said, well, being brought up in a general store in a small town, I knew everyone in the town and the surrounding territory. And one of the things we were not allowed to talk about anybody. Not everybody knew it, because if they did, they might not go on trade lists. And we had to have everybody on trade lists. And so I don't know. I guess that was like we kind of sticked around for a while. But she typed this. Well, I guess that was about it as far as I told her. Okay. When I was a girl, I worked in this hotel, which was the hotel, and which we're hoping to increase, extend it so it looked just a lot like it used to. And the Smiths owned it, Penny and Mrs. Smith, and they had a daughter that lived in this apartment building where we are. This was an apartment. And anyway, I came over here on Saturdays to make a little money, and got $1 a day, and I came at 7 o'clock in the morning and got done about 8 o'clock at night. But
What did you do?
cleaned house, made beds, helped with. I didn't make them, I mean, I helped. And we did dishes, we did laundry, we did ironing, anything they needed to do. And the hotel, they served meals to people. Men who worked on the road, like for the electric company or the road, they would come and they stayed right here and they got their meals and all. And then on weekends they would go home. And I think there were, as I remember, there was about 4 or 5 rooms that were over the part that will be built up. That was the office where they came in and people would, and over there is where the rooms where the men stayed or the people stayed. And then you came into the part where those people are sitting now, and that was where the Smiths lived, and that's where the dining room was, and the kitchens were in the back. And the Smiths had their room upstairs, but nobody ever stayed up there, but you had to clean the whole thing over there. And they rented this part out to different people, and so I just kind of wanted to tell it that being brought up in this town, as I said, I know everyone in the town, and I'm happy to say that I was brought up in this village, and I thought, well, if anybody ever read the story about that Hillary Clinton put out, It Takes a Village, and how she talked about the people that helped to raise the children, well, that's the way it was in Edwardsburg. And I had kind of an experience that I thought was something that people might not. They say, oh, I just live in a hick town. Well, it might be nice to live in a hick town because at that time I was probably a senior in high school, maybe a junior, and a couple came here from just dropped out of the sky, and which people would do. There were other people who did too. I know, but some stayed and some didn't. But anyway, these people stayed, and it was right in this apartment building. And I got to be real good friends with them. Because like I said, I was over here a lot. And anyway, they wanted to take me, and they were going to take me to Chicago. That was a big trip. Boy, it was all planned, and I was so excited I was going to get to go to Chicago. Well, in the meantime, there was a man, and they called him the Colonel, and he lived in this the hotel too. And anyway, he had an old man, and he had his ears open to what was going on. He didn't like what he heard, and from these people, and nobody knew who they were. They said they had shirt-tail relation around here, but anyway, nobody knew them. And the closer it got to our leaving to go on the train to go to Chicago, he got more concerned, and he went over to my father, and he said, I don't think if that was my daughter that I would allow her to go on that train with those people. So I remember my parents coming together over to, and I was here, all ready to go. We were all ready to go. And my father came and my mother, and they said, we want to talk to you. And so I went outside, and they talked to me, and they said, we don't think you're going to go to Chicago with those people. We don't want you to go to Chicago. Well, you know, I was throwing a fit. And anyway, and my aunt and uncle, they used that excuse because I love my Uncle George and my aunt, and they were coming from India. They weren't coming, but they said they're coming from Indianapolis, and they want you to be here when they get here. So nevertheless, I did not go to Chicago. So I said, never feel bad if somebody, nosy neighbor, makes something happen that may be good for you or your family. So sometimes you don't like to have them do that. Well, that's about my story, and I have just some other things of remembering as a child. I remember the cook stoves, cooking at home, our home and our kitchen, and there were, and you heated the water in the cook in the winter for washing, and then in the summertime you had a kerosene stove in the back room. I remember the first radio that my uncle, my dad's brother, Uncle Fred, he made it for us, and it was in the back room, and as a little girl, he put the earphones on my ears, and you could get one station. It's connected to you. And the first television set, anyway, it was exciting to have a radio. But the first television set, my Bob's sister lived in Boline, and we would go down there, and it was just a little bitty box, and they had it up on the refrigerator. And then everybody came on Saturday night and pulled the chairs around this in the kitchen, in a row, like in the theater, and we watched wrestling. We didn't have television in Edwardsburg at that time, but they could get it in Boline because they were closer to Chicago, so that was always an exciting time. One time, back to the store, of course, which was a center of more or less the center of town because, well, people would come, the women would come in the afternoon to come and get their food for their supper, and It was just a big visiting time too. It took a long time, you know. Everything happened at the corner of the store. But anyway, and I was just a little girl, and my father had to have they had a night watchman who stayed in the store to watch it at night. And they talked about this. Bill Brown was an old man that lived here in town down by the railroad track, and right in that house next to the elevator. And my husband and I lived in that house too, but at one time. But anyhow, he would roam the streets at night like an old person might do when they get older, and he rapped on the door, and my dad had this night watchman in there, and so anyway, when he tried to call his man's name, but he couldn't get any response, and it ended up that he shot the man, and the man died. And that was quite a tragedy.
What was his name?
It's Bill Brown, and I took that out of Otis's book. I took out the name. And I
Yeah, that's the man that was
one of
killed, I
them
think.
was,
I think so.
Zenny Nadella Andrews.
A stranger came to town or
George
something?
No, this Bill Brown just roamed the streets.
Oh, I
And
thought he was the watchman at the store.
I don't think she gave her
Caused quite a
name.
lot of
Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
at one time, the students, there were about 300 students in the school, and I can remember people saying, there's about 300 people in Edwardsburg. The actual town of Edwardsburg was not that big, so they had about 300 kids in the school and about 300 people in the town, so. During the Depression days, food stamps, I remember the food stamps. You had to have them or you couldn't get any food, and you had to have gas tickets. And
Was that during the Depression or during the war?
that was during
War?
well, the war. I'm sorry. Take that back. Yeah. At one time, we lived in the town where the funeral home is. My father bought that house from Dr. Tomlin, and we moved in that. That was in 1929. That was year I was a freshman, and it was the coldest house in the world. And it froze the ice upstairs in the bedroom. It was that cold. I thought one of the things, I just tell these things that kind of come to my mind, things to remember. People during now back to the Depression, people brought a lot, pay for their groceries. They bring eggs or they bring vegetables, but not too many things in vegetables because people had their own gardens and their own orchards, and they just didn't. It's not like that. There was just a small case for the vegetables. But they used to bring the eggs, and then my dad would go to South Bend, and he had a panel truck, and he'd go over to pick up the groceries from the wholesale houses to bring back to Edwardsburg to sell, and then he'd have to take the egg in order to get rid of these eggs that the farmers brought in, because we couldn't sell them all in the store. Well, he took them over to Granger, because some woman had a store over there, and she had an outlet for selling eggs. But before he took it, he had to candle the eggs. Now, if anybody has never lived on a farm or had any occasion to candle eggs, you put a candle under, a little light under it, and then you look into the egg, see what's in there. So that was part of my job. I had looked at the growth of the eggs.
And they were looking for?
Well, there's a chicken. Old egg.
It's fertilized.
Yeah, right.
We had corn roast at Conservation Club. I don't know how many people here can remember the corn roast.
I remember my
Everybody.
husband.
We had in the store at about this time of the year was everybody. They went deer hunting. People went deer hunting. I don't know what they do now, but the men all went deer hunting. And not only the story goes, the men, they took their good suits out to their car, but they were going deer hunting. And anybody remembers Lonnie Wemby and his group, they took their suits. But then they would bring the deer back, and they would hang them in the cooler in our store or in the back room or whatever. And when they all got back, which was about right around Thanksgiving time, well then, the Bob would close the store at night, and the men would come and they cut the deer cutting night. And so all the men came with their deer. Each deer man got his deer cut, and then the next one, the next one. Now they never ran any of the saws. The regular butchers had to do that, but they did have a runner who ran from the store to the tavern and back. It was a real big night for the men. Well, that's about my extent. I mean, your people that ask me anything you want, I'll try to answer. Oh, by the way, I have a couple books up here. This was our family album, and this was a book that my grandmother kept. She kept books like this, full of clippings, not only of Edwardsburg, but news clippings. There's a picture of the Monday Evening Club. And this is a little paper that I found. This was put out by a man named Dan Barber. Dan Barber was related to French's who had French's Resort. And this was printed in 1890. Dan Barber had his grocery store right down here next to the stove. Bob and this stove. And he was a very different person, and he sold salmon soap. That was a specialty. And poor guy, he had penny candy, but he didn't have it very long. The kids stole it. They loved to go in and snitch candy from him. But anyway, he said, well, I just like it. And this is just an album, and the reason I love that is because I thought you might be interested to see some of the styles of the people. Here's a picture. This is a baseball day out in Christiana Lake, and these are townspeople who went out to watch the ball games. They had lots of good guys. And we also have this picture in the museum. This is this is the first grade, it's the first, second, third, fourth, up to the sixth grade, I suppose, or fifth grade of the old school building. And that picture is this is George Andrews, Arthur Brady. Oh, that's my mother's graduating class.
Harry Meredith, Duff Dunning,
I hope that you people remember names of people that I've told about, and so if just anything you want to ask me, feel free. I'll try to.
I was going to say about Dan Barber. We used to get him mad. We'd tell him that he had cats in his coffee barrel and really made him mad. He'd have to get all the cats in the coffee barrel. He had to love coffee.
You can't quit too well.
Fleming and Gertrude Smith ran the hotel when you worked here. And they have a daughter. What was the daughter's name?
Her name was Dorothy. Yes, and she had one child, and her husband, well, she died very young, right after, just shortly after that.
After he was born?
Well, she lived a while after when he was born, but shortly after that. And her son came last year, this year, was and there were
his house burned.
the hotel back in that would have been in the 60s. They had some of the older ladies in town got to stay in this hotel, and they got their meals, and they had, it's just like we do today. The old folks go to these different places where they get care, and somebody feeds them, and the lady did here too.
How many houses have you lived in Edwardsburg?
The one I was born in, and then I lived down where Bassett's lived. We went there when I was 3 years old, and and then I lived in Mayville. That was it. Well, then after we were married, we lived in
What houses did you live in after you were married?
Down by the elevator. Well, I'll have to tell you where we lived. Anyway, they lived there. Did you live over there? No, Mary and Otis lived over there.
We lived on by the elevator.
Yeah, but originally you lived in the little house that comes right out from the cemetery.
Well, that's where Jean was born.
Jean was born. That we
I
called
was always going to put up a sign. This is
Pearl
where-
Valley.
I was going to say, this is where Kristen, Jean Montgomery was born.
Well, they called that house, and Francis and Holly Broker lived there, and they called it Pearl Valley because they had their first child and they had to move out to another house. There was just three bedrooms, 3 rooms, kitchen, dining, or kitchen, bedroom, and living room, and pumped the water, and it was. And you went outdoors to the toilet. That was always the outside toilet.
That was Jack's place.
I don't know.
On the left hand of the right hand.
Right, going that way.
The gray house is the Smith house?
No, this is on,
Hamilton's.
you're coming from the cemetery, it's right straight at the beginning.
It's coming in the cemetery, you run right into
Run into that little house? You all live in that little house?
Did you live right there? That's when I come. Yeah, well, they did.
You got the cemetery in front of see which house they're talking about.
It's all been torn down, it's all been changed.
Right next to Street, so it's in the office and get it close.
Probably gone.
Yeah.
Like Edwardsburg's back.
people that come out for summer and we're not ready.
Oh, okay, their names were Krishna, right. And they were all Jewish people. And they rented the domes to the people in Chicago. And it was just like a hotel. And then they got their meals there and everything. And those people, there was quite a few of them would come. And they would walk up past the store. And my dad's Uncle Isaiah, they never had any children, and he was very, very fussy. And anyway, he'd just go crazy because, you know, they all came in and they all talked this language, the Chicago language, I mean, that, and he couldn't understand the things they said, and he'd just get so upset when they'd come in. But they were very nice people. They were nice. It was just, they were different. And,
Where did they push off the
sidewalk?
Well, they get off the sidewalk, they did.
Could I add something that Doris Olson said about them? She said they lived over near her Ed and Vicky when she was just a little girl, and she said they were coming down the street one day, and she walked out there and she said, "Are you a Jew?"
They were Jewish. Yes, there were quite a few people, different people who lived in that house. There was one that came, he was what was that, Kurbish?
Kubish.
Oh, Jack, I could not think of that
Was an
name.
ambassador.
Yeah, to Brazil or something.
No, to Ceylon.
Ceylon, okay,
Ceylon is
Ceylon, that's right.
now.
That's right.
My daughter corresponded
They're still
with one of her kids after they went there. And that's why I remember because
Yeah, wasn't it Kathy Kubish? That was interesting.
That was pretty
That
much
was
the
their
Russian.
daughter's name. Was there Kathy Kubish?
I know, I had a friend,
I could not
Gene
think of
Smith,
his name. I was trying to think the other day.
lived on Pleasant Lake, and her mother was, if you remember the green stamps, if you bought something, you got a green stamp, and you could take it to a store and trade it. Well, I guess maybe do that, I don't know.
Fascinating.
But her mother had charge of the store, and due to the Depression, they closed those stores in Chicago, and so she came out here to live because they had a cottage out here. And so anyway, she,
Go to Greenstein.
yeah, but anyway, I just don't.
there's several people there.
What about Pleasant Lake? You said that was the center of things? What do you
Well, it
remember?
was a center, people came from South Bend and all over. All our lives we were at was a lake. And I can remember when Fran was just about 3 years old, and she's here. Anyway, my sister Margaret and myself, we used to take her down to the lake and set her on the edge of the water, and that's where she stayed. And we went and my mother did not go, let me tell you. She couldn't go. She had too much work to do. Those people, we can't. My folks, I mean, all people did. I'm not just mine. But they canned. They had their own gardens. They had chickens. And they had work to do. They just could not be running their kids to the lake by any means. When I was a girl and graduated from high school, I went South Bend to Thomas Commercial School. And my dad, our sister Margaret went to Michigan State. And I remember him saying to me, I said, I thought I'd kind of like to go to medical school. He said, I can only send one girl, so I'm sending Margaret. Margaret was valedictorian of the class, so she got to go. And I got to go to business school, so Fran. But anyway, how I got to business school, I had to ride. And I caught a ride in the morning with Guy Gibbons. I think we left Edwardsburg at 6 o'clock and ventured all the way to South Bend through the snow, and I mean the snow. And all you could see was a fence post. There wasn't any road. You just went between the fence rows, pretty much. And I went about 6 o'clock in the morning, and I got over there, and Thomas Commercial School didn't open till 8 o'clock, but you could go up and stand in the hallway. And so there was some others that came too. And then in the evening, I caught the ride back, and Guy Gibbons worked for Packard Company, Packard Garage in South Bend. And they closed about 6 or 6:30. So I waited from about 3 o'clock in the afternoon or 3:30, whatever time school closed, till I could get a ride home. I hated school, as you imagine I could. And anyway, we went to the Oliver Theater for 10 cents a show. Saw every show, not once, twice, maybe 3 times. Just for something to do. And there was a girl by the name of Villardson that lived out at Garber Lake, and her dad worked at Studebaker, had the same situation, so we went together. But your parents did not drive you. There was no way that they were, well, you didn't have a car. Yeah, there was a car. I can remember Dad put the car up in the garage on blocks, so he didn't have to drive it from down on Main, or drive the car up to the store. He would drive it to walk. And those are just things that
Tell us about jobs.
well, one time I worked for Tom when he had remember when he had the restaurant there? I went over there and worked a little bit. I didn't work too long at any one place.
He wasn't in the restaurant.
No, he wasn't in the restaurant, but he had a restaurant there, and I worked at the hotel a while. And I worked at the store. He had the Elton store. Oh, I did after. That's after I was married. Yeah. Well, there's my boss right there.
She was living.
And
My daughter married.
How did you have to get a job at the post office?
well, because
His
as
wife's
I
name
told
was
you before, when they started the Hams came to town, the Ham family. They lived here, and they began to buy. They bought the building and put the bank up, and they bought the building and they put the grocery store up, and the business started to go down, down, down. Now the people weren't going to drive across the railroad track to come into Edwardsburg when they could stop at the store right on their way home. From people, we depended on a lot of traffic, like coming, especially in the summertime, the people coming out to the lakes. And so consequently, we were out of business. And so I went to work at the post office and wished I could have got a steady job because that was good pay. And but Otis told me, he said, I don't care if you pass the exam. He said, you'll not get the job because Dale Reed at that time was working on the trains, and they were starting to put the mail on the trucks. And he didn't want to get on a truck. He did not want to drive a truck. So he lived in Edwardsburg, and he had an opportunity to get in the mail. got the job that I would have gotten. But I was substituting for Lyle on this route, and they were putting this new route in. They put Route 3 in at that time. Yeah.
Dale transferred off the railroad on
Yeah.
Route 3.
He did.
He
And,
lived in Beverly.
but riding with Lyle
Well,
Lane as his
I see her
substitute.
about
was-
once every summer. I see her.
Never a
Because
dull
they were-
moment.
When we
No,
moved
when I had
to
help, I just had to get my own, I put a sign in the
neighbors,
window.
they lived at the same
And I
side.
said, well, I'll tell you what you do, you just
She
come
likes
around
to sing.
tomorrow, you go with me on the route,
Remember when the kids first
see the whole
went to
deal,
school?
take ride the whole route, and then you go home and think about
I
it.
just remember
Because if you want,
that.
if you're interested, come back
My
tomorrow, if you're
children were
not, like
babies,
this.
yeah.
So that's what I did. Sometimes it worked, and I had some that never come back. They just thought that was too much.
How long did she work for the post office?
Just a couple of years.
You know, I got a picture at home. This Magnolia, I think it was an Argus man. They took a picture, I got it at home. It's got Mary Catherine in it. And Edith Smith worked as a clerk. It's got a postmaster. It's got
Oh, this guy.
Lyle Cunby. And it's got other fellow, Rick Allo. I can't think, he was a substitute. And it's got a picture of Mary Catherine and Fred Seaman and myself. Gloria Sherwood.
For Lyle.
She was
It's
substitute.
his route. I took his route. The
I
first
think
time.
you make a copy of that for us.
I got a copy, it's the biggest, all the artists. I got one,
Yeah, but could we have a copy of it for the museum?
I suppose, could you get one of that?
Sure.
Yeah, it's got a picture of all the Mary Catherine's in it.
Okay, tell us, now you were driving a route in your car, right?
Right.
What did Mary Catherine do when she was delivering the mail?
When I drove it alone.
Oh,
You drove his car?
No,
No,
my
no,
car.
no.
Your car?
And when I got out of my car after the first day that I didn't go, he took his vacation, I had to take him alone. And I got out of that car. Didn't we go 52 miles a while?
Pardon?
We went about 52 miles,
I did
didn't we?
52 miles and 900
And
miles.
500 stops, yeah.
Oh.
I got out of that car, I crawled in the house. Marty came out, my youngest, and I said, you're gonna have to get supper, I can't do it. And it was,
I would take them, have them sit, like you're the steel wheel, they would sit here, I sat in the middle, I delivered the mail. They couldn't sit in the back because it was full of mail. I always drove what they call an old man's car, it was a four-door. So I had the mail all piled up in the back seat, so no place else to sit behind the wheel. And I sat in the middle and I had a box here with the mail in it. So they could see it, all the operation, they didn't do anything but just ride. They were sitting behind the wheel, but they weren't steering.
So what kind of a car did you drive, Mary Ann?
oh Lord, you don't ask me when it comes to cars. We never had we had one new car. We had a Ford. We bought a Ford from not Hayden Merton, Hayden. Joe Hayden, Bob Hayden. Wasn't it Bob Hayden?
Bob.
Yeah, okay. We bought that car from him, so it must have been a Ford. And anyway, otherwise that was on, and it cost us $600.
New car.
New car. And my mother gave us some money, and I bought the car. Well, I don't just remember what happened, but anyway, I know that we borrowed the money, and I remembered that we didn't pay our bill real good. And my dad called me in, and he said, and he explained what, and he said, we got two other girls, and they need money too. Of course, we said, well, we need money. They said, well, our two other girls need money too, and we'll expect your money. And I mean, my father was a wonderful person, but he was strict too, and we paid for that. And my son-in-law, my granddaughters have borrowed money, but he didn't do that to them. And it made a little bit, they never got it paid back. And I said, well, there's where you made your first mistake, right there.
So what year was this new car, do you know?
Joanne, stop asking me questions. I'm lucky, I don't know really, I have no idea.
Well, when was this new car?
Well,
the one you
it had to be, we got, let's see,
30s, 40s.
we came back here, Ruth Ellen was, she was 9 months old, and we did stay in in Frankfurt, Indiana. Bob played baseball in Frankfurt. And anyway, we were down there about a year where she was born there in Frankfurt. And then we came back, so that had to be okay, Ruth, tell me what year it was.
You're born, Ruth.
37 or 8.
37, 38.
Yeah, 38 probably. Yeah, and yeah, he played for Indianapolis. Well, he went down to work for Ingelberg or something. And this was a mama papa outfit, and they made the enameled stoves and refrigerators. And the union came in, and so he was a last man in and the first man out. So he came back home and took care of my grandfather Rogers, who lived over by the Methodist church. And then we went into the store, and Bob learned how to cook that way. So, but and Ben B. Met's grandmother took care of my grandfather. So, and they lived right next door for years. And what was your grandmother? Jeannie, yeah, Wagner, that's right.
I can remember sitting on with your mother when building.
Oh, really?
5, 6.
I was 6.
There were 3 fires. There were 3 fires in Edwardsburg.
Oh, yeah, there was a lot of fires in Edwardsburg, but I just don't. But the ones that burned on that side of the street, it was a Stevens, which is Mrs. Thornton's store, or restaurant, or whatever she had. Sam Reinhardt's grocery store, and Jean Claire's barber shop. It was all burned. A department store. Well, that was at one time it was Sam Reinhardt's grocery store. It changed to different things.
And later the Coombs battery shop
Yeah, well, that was a different.
and Hayden's garage burned one evening. That's what I remember. That was just beyond where the other apartments.
So it's all past office.
Across from the library.
Okay, it's all past office street. Yes, it's just twice.
Gas Street.
Twice that street burned. Where was the third burn? Oh, there was. The reason that there were so many fires those days is because they had the shingle roofs and everybody burned wood. And there was no way, I remember when I was just real little, that my dad and others would grab this tank, which was on some sort of a wheels, and it had a tongue on it, and they would get on each side of that, a bunch of men, and pull that thing down there. Well, down where, Peach Fetters lived in that house, there was just an old shack of a house that sat there, and when that burned, well, when those guys got that wagon, and they started going down that hill, that wagon started going and they were scared to death. So, but that's how they got to the fires, and a lot of houses burned down completely. There was a shack of a house that was set down on Hamilton Street, clear to the railroad track, and there was a man lived in there, and I can't, Devil something his name was. And anyway, Del Crump, he kept diaries of Edwardsburg. He had a diary that if we had those today, they would be worth $1 million to us. But the house burned. I don't think he burned in it, but everything in it burned. All the diaries and everything were gone. So there were lots of fires.
In the village when somebody passed away, and you had this paper up there.
I don't remember. Chief, you tell it.
All I remember is we were with Jerry and Pam and Evelyn, and we came home, and Jack couldn't come running out, and he said, Stalin died, Stalin died. Jerry said, good. put 50 cents in the water. That's what you did.
Yeah, we did. We collect the money and I don't know what we must have did. We buy the flowers.
Collected money. Oh,
We gave the money, probably that was.
It was like a loose leaf notebook. It was on the counter in the store. You wrote your name in and put the money in the jar. Yeah, I remember that. I can remember it too.
Do you want to tell me something? You want to say something about Miss Edwardsburg contest or anything? That was exciting. We had, the first contest we had that little guy from the South Bend Trivia come out and be one of our judges. Oh gosh, I had his name right on it.
Not real dark.
South Bend.
Jim Saunders.
Was Roland Kelly small?
Yeah.
Well, anyway, we couldn't pay him any money. I mean, we didn't have any money. So it was our first time we'd ever done this. And anyway, so he came out and so he didn't get any money. And he said, don't ever ask me to come back.
Did he have Kelly's name on?
Very careful. What can you tell us about French?
What?
What can you tell us about French?
About French's Resort? Well,
It was a good place to eat.
yeah, it was a good place to eat. It was a nice place to be, and people used to come out from Chicago, came out on the train, and came out to the South Bend, and they had a furry the horses with had seats in them, and they come and pick them up, and they take them out there and they spend the week, and you got your meals, and it was a nice place to be.
How many rooms did they have?
Oh gosh, I'm gonna say probably 20, maybe.
They had a dining room.
Big dining room.
They have a place where you could dance. No, just the dining room
No.
and a front porch, right?
Oh yeah, big open
Yeah.
porch, yeah. And then that was on Eagle Lake.
Right.
Then we had like the Terrace Lanes, which was Schick's Resort. That was on Christiana Lake.
Right.
And that,
And the Christiana Lodge.
no, that,
Go there.
yeah, but that was strictly hotel. But this terrace was where you could get meals and you could dance. And I remember my dad being supervisor. That was, he would go out and assess properties. And then he'd bring, all that stuff came in. And we typed it. We had to type it. They had a carriage about that long on a typewriter. And you put that in, you had to type all that stuff was done by hand.
Are you old enough to remember the Miles Bridge? You ever go across the Miles Bridge?
Yeah. That was, I remember, just faintly remember, yeah.
Christianity, yes, that has to be it. It's
But,
nice fish off the islands.
The Schick,
Because the boards were
he had married,
gone.
I mentioned that my grandfather Roger's brother took his life, and then Mrs. Schick married this Zelda. And my dad was supervisor, and he was out doing appraisals, and my mother went with him a lot. And anyway, they stopped at Schick's and at the terrace there, in Skunk Hall Spanish Terrace, and it was quite a place. We had a lot of things going on. We had our school stuff out there, banquets and stuff. And the top of it, the ceiling, had it all decorated. Remember? I don't know what the theme was, but it was all trimmed up. Well, anyway, he said to my mother, I got something for you. And she said, oh, really? He said, yes. He said, and he brought out this great big sword. And it was, he said this was the Revolutionary War. It belonged to your grandma, some of your relatives. And so he gave it to her. And grandson down north has that sword in his house. So that's kind
Towards the end of that
You wouldn't be old enough to remember.
like built the railroad jacks, when that's when the railroad jacks down the and then that one on the west side
History that
and south on
this
this.
building out at
Anyway, as you walked in the thing, the window sign on the left, they started to cut the crack. The floor was sinking.
All I know, all I know is, it was empty so much, and it was a grocery store, it was different things, but it never seemed to have anything that stayed there very long.
Was it the Ed Turner that wanted it?
No, he was up this, Edwardsburg had two towns, or Adamsville had two towns. There was one on one side of the creek and one on the other side. And I don't know how.
And I only know that from having looked at enough maps.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated.
But no, that building has been long.
Remember the mill?
Yes, I do remember that, and I remember that as kids we dived off, well, Margaret mentioned it. I can remember that too. Margaret, do you remember the Adamsville Mill?
No.
Don't you? Well, we used to go down there.
I just remember going down for picnics there.
Oh, you mean, on the creek?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'd go there and swim at the
We'd
dam.
swim, yeah. We'd go underneath where the water came over and get underneath there.
What's the big barn?
What kinds of things did your father carry in his store? I knew back when we were little, I knew he carried shoes, but what else?
They carried shoes, they carried clothes, they carried materials, and my uncle Isaiah, he did that part. My dad did the grocery part more of it. And I tell you, every bolt of material had to be wrapped just so.
Probably like a dime store.
No, it wasn't like a dime store. It wasn't like a department store. More like a department store. It had everything. It had not too much as far as farm. Think the farmers would use, but people would use. I remember when prior to going to school, I wanted to go to school, and I remember I ran up to the store, and a lady by the name of Belle Blair, who I can remember very well, just a wonderful lady. I told her I needed a new dress because I needed to go to school. Well, she didn't know what to do, but she did what I asked her, and I got a new dress, and I went to school. But then I got something else when I got home. And I hadn't even started school yet. I remember, we talk about the Quimbys. There was a man, Fawn Quimby. He lived down east of town, almost to the railroad track. And we had a snowstorm, and I was in school, first grade, going to the school. You had to walk to school. And the hill, when you go down the hill here, it's not very steep, but it used to be steep before they filled in the highway. And I was slipping and sliding on way, trying to get up that hill. And that old man, I called him an old man, for I wasn't very old at the time. He took and came and got my hand and helped me get up that hill. And I remember him very well.
Who was your great uncle?
His wife was a smith.
What was his name?
His name was Fawn Quimby.
Fawn Quimby.
And was
How was he related to Lyle?
Oh gosh, they were all related. Probably enough.
he was more related to Phyllis Quimby.
Yeah. But the Quimbys, they were all related. Kinship somewhere there.
But Lyle Quimby was probably farther on in his house. He was not close.
But his folks lived in Niles. But Mrs. Quimby, who became Mrs. Beeran, and then she married this Beeran. And it's in your oldest book about him. Anyway, they had they cut the ice out of the lake and then they'd store it. Well, he had an ice house.
I remember that.
And he also had a grocery store. There were a lot of buildings. There was a whole fire that took all these buildings on this image while it was
Where did they store the ice that they cut on the lake?
The dinner.
in that Beeran's barn. He had a great big barn over by our house there. And it was right, the Jefferson Street.
Long before I...
Oh, yeah, it was. I don't know how it got going then. It did not burn.
They stored a lot there at Uncle Harley's right next door to us. He had a nice house.
Did he have an ice house too? Yeah. So they went,
There was a nice house right down the street here.
We've got people stationed
Right
behind
inside,
it.
because I used to come and get it when we had a store.
But I kind of wonder if they had, they did not, they had, ice house like over at Barron's at one time, and then they had it at another place another time. I don't think they had 3 of them in the town at one time. I think they came, it was just different
There's
times.
coffee and
One there in
cookies
my
there.
hands wasn't very big. That was just.
What do you think?
Good size.
8 o'clock.
Yeah.
We can stay for a few
Here
more
again, when you
minutes.
said that side of the street burned, was that when your family had a store there? Did the store burn?
Yes, because in Otis's book, it tells there were two buildings left, and that was
I'm
the
amazed
hardware
at how much
store that we
you know.
know, and my grandfather's that were left. The rest were burned. Of course, you always, anybody who remembers your at that time, George Stacks, there was always that big hole in the ground that finally got covered up. And then the fire station was right across the street, and that burst out there.
Did the fire station burn too?
Everywhere there was a fire station.
Rack 'em, stack 'em, George.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Charlie Bliss's house, do you know anything about that?
Charlie Bliss's
Who
house.
lived there before?
Oh, boy.
That's a fancy old house, that's what
It's
I
a
know.
beautiful old house.
Did, you're just the fellow that looked after him, if he had children or who got that house? Because I, there was someone that looked after Charlie, trying to hit his tree.
The next time I see Mary Kaplan, I'm gonna find out. She lived in Matthew's house. It was a 2-story house. It was a 2-story house, and then they added
Another
stores.
story.
And I wonder if she lived in there before or after the admission.
I know where the Blanchard's lived.
I don't, it was an empty house. It was dirty stucco when I moved here. It was empty for a long time before me.
I don't know.
I just wondered if you
I
knew.
just,
Who was it?
it's been there 2 years. But,
They closed 2 railroads. There's a crossing down here on the curve where they closed, this down here you're talking about, the other way. Past that.
yes, it closed 2 crossings at one time.
That was closed because of all the
Oh, now they're talking about wrecks on the train, on the track.
Oh, Lord.
And we had pictures of 2 different ones.
Marge Sexy, Marge Call.
I don't remember the
Killed
And then
I
the,
remember the dances. We had lots of dances.
or am I mixing him up with someone else?
No, some of, I think Dutch Dunn still alive.
Oh, okay, then.
Okay, but I've seen if there was a Dunn.
Okay, then was there a Dunning that he was killed on the
They
track?
didn't know how to dance. All they did
Oh,
was
yeah.
just to whirl you around.
And then in our modern time, they, parks,
But they started dancing like that.
they got, I think right there at the middle, they,
Well, when she was talking about fires, the roof of this building, when they were putting a new roof on, this had caught at one time, around the chimney,
oh, you could see
around the
burnt,
chimney.
charred.
It was charred, it was still secure, they did not have to change the boards, but you could see where it was just, in fact, we took photographs of it before they put the wallboard back, or this stuff. Sheet rock. I knew I'd think of the right word.
But I was gonna tell it, and then I forgot it. Well, Tom Kerr came from Mishawaka or something. Well, anyway, and out they had a cottage at the lake. And you know, like I said, we spent our time at the lake. We knew people from places. And he came, I remember, well, we were just down to the lake, and here we are talking to these guys and all, and some, probably Berdine Sampson, Caroline Sherman, all these girls, they're gone. They're, I mean, they're long. But anyway, we talked, and some way or other, we got Tom to come up to, with his friends, to my folks' house, because we had a piano, and he was a piano player. And we had a great time. We just sat around, sang songs, and it was great. So I knew Tom Kerr for a long, long time. And then he went to the church, Methodist church like we did. So, yeah, he was good. Didn't know her mother very well, but it didn't.
Wasn't he?
But we just, as I say, the lake was that was our fun place. We just had a great time. Went swimming every single day, but I couldn't go to 4 o'clock in the afternoon because the sun was too hot and you couldn't get down that day.
How big was the beach at that time? It's small now.
It was a little bit bigger, but no. Sometimes when the lake went down, there was a terrible, the people down at the lake and the people in town got real hungry about that because the lake went down so bad. It was hard. But nature takes care of it. They want to get back. But you see,
with everyone.
Oh, we're down towards the property. Yeah.
Edwardsburg, I came with her tonight too, because before we went down the mountain. Usually I park at the next
that
day.
was a lake.
Just because, you know,
And,
I didn't
well,
find
boy,
it.
I walked out. Never go.
There's a park, public beach down there, and then they cruises have the rest of it. Well, at one time, we used Tuesdays. And then they began,
Tuesday, that's
and
another
the band
one.
house, was a quarter, we beat a basket.
Dime.
A dime for the basket.
And he comes out,
Because we always came from the country.
Toby told her, or Max told her, at the drugstore. Maxine.
Yeah, this side.
Maxine, was she your
That was
age?
free. And then the women's and
Then they moved to
when you were saying Max, you said Matt Maxson, because I was thinking Max Davis. Because I remember those Davis was over there. Oh, yes, where did they sell it?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
Were there any more questions for Mary Catherine?
Well, I hope I didn't bore you to tears.
Steve told Ed and I.
Let's give her a hand.
Oh, I remember
He was,
Steve told.
he was
Before
at
you
the
get a cup of coffee and
and
some cookies,
we pushed his car.
I wonder,
Pushed it
since
out of
this is the
town.
last,
And then
the
somebody
museum
drove
is
it.
closing at the end of this
Steve's
month,
here.
it won't reopen
So
until
Steve
May.
came out of the
But we'd like to
town.
continue these next
Called the
year when
cops
we
because
reopen.
his car
And are there
was-
any people in town that
So
you
they
would
took him home
particularly
and there
like
it is
us
in
to
his yard. He
It
could
turned out
not explain.
very
Oh,
interesting stories of the town. So if you would like to
The only
recommend
car
some
ever
names,
stole.
we can set up some
Help
interviews.
Steve.
He's not from town, but he's from Mason Township,
We
and
got
Carl
practical
Allen knows a
jokes.
lot of history.
Carl Allen.
The day he died, he never knew who did that. Nobody didn't know whether he'd done it and hitchhiked to ride with somebody.
I have yet.
Really know how, just how much he
Ben
behind.
We ought to interview Ben.
Ben Bayment's father had a store on the corner when my dad had a store just this side of the corner, so years ago, I forgot the
We're hoping to get them next, you know, when we're closing, we'll open
Yeah,
it.
but they were down
So
on
maybe
the
it's May. No,
Maybe you
June or
you
something.
should know.
Well, if the weather's nice, maybe we'll have the backyard.
That would be
That'd be nice.
Yeah, we can put up.
Sure.
So we found all that stuff, it didn't go, the people, they lost a lot of money. People would come, some of them worked on the railroad, they paid for it, others came from Bridger and all around, they had these cheese boxes this long, this wide, and they had little books in there, people's name on there, and they lost enough money to buy a new car, we told them how. My dad was going, no, he was working at Studebaker, so they kept going.
I remember those little books that you get.
Oh, yeah, everybody charged their girls, you paid by the month.
People did the drugstore.
When my dad died, and we
Even
closed
to
up
the
the,
end. They had practice.
out the drawers, surprised at the books that were in there that would never, books after
We'll
books.
have that at the
The
service
Depression days
station.
were terrible. I
Too good
remember
hard
my
it
dad,
is.
he get
They
about
want to
one or two
start a
cuts of
collection.
We
cigarettes,
had one.
just, and people got mad at him.
Who lived in
They said you're giving them to the other guy. Well, he
He
wasn't.
was rented
He
for
only
like
got a
over
couple
$100.
cartons to hand out to all
We
his
sent him a bill
customers.
and always come
They just didn't have them. Those were
just keep paying
That
all
was
over
the
again.
Right.
Three grocery stores,
Yeah,
drugstore,
Yeah.
and a hardware. But we've come a long way. And we don't have a drugstore.
It's called progress.
And we all meet in Martin's.
Margaret and Nancy, would you consent to being interviewed? Because if you talk to people in this town, you'd be surprised how many couples met at Culver's and are still married today. And I think you could have a lot to tell us.
I don't, we'd have to think about that.
Would you?
Till next summer.
Because you're part of the town, a lot of things happen down at Eagle Lake.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure you can tell us a lot
Some you
about.
can't tell.
Some
you don't want to tell,
Or maybe the people
Oh,
in town don't want to
we
hear
had a
about
lot
it.
of good memories there too.
Well, thank you for asking us. We'll think about it.
Okay, because we do have your dad's picture up, and I think a lot of people.
Oh, yeah.
We'd
Oh, yeah.
also like to get the Dobrich girls too, to talk
Oh,
about
soon.
their.
Oh, haven't you? Yeah. I bet they have some memorabilia and stuff.
They've shared with us. So
Oh, okay, good.
thank you. But they would be good too, to
Oh,
interview
yeah.
the two Dobrich girls.
Oh, yeah.
All right, coffee and cookies, and remember to deposit your $1,000 at the door.